on. To back up here, I know that there's a lot of people that come out of the private sector, not necessarily enforcers or not necessarily contractors, that don't deal with these issues every day. Like the insurance industry, they kind of have their own set of fire safety standards as opposed to what we have in the state, typically more restrictive. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the processes. Right now there's 4 fire codes in the country, and they've each carved out kind of a little geographic niche or client niche. There's an effort underway to combine those originally into one that fell apart, so then there was 2, and now we're back up to 3. So what we have to do in the state of Minnesota is select one of the fire codes. And we do that through the Minnesota State Fire Chiefs Association, who reviews the codes and make recommendations to my boss, Tom Brace. And Steve Zacard is the outgoing chair of the State Chiefs Code Committee, and Bob James is the incoming chair for that. So I thought it was appropriate to recognize them since they were heavily involved in a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. I wanted to share some of the things that are going on in terms of this, and then we'll try to go through this fairly rapidly. And then I want to give you a quick demo of our CD-ROM that's going out. It's actually under beta test right now for people who took our class, and we'll be mailing it out here within a month. We hope to have them copied and sent out to everybody. So I want to give you a little demonstration, then maybe take a look at some of the things that are on the horizon. What are some of the issues, since that's one thing that Scott talked about. Where do we see things going here in the near future in terms of technology, some of the changes and how things are changing. So, as you know, I have kind of a warped sense of humor, and I like Gary Larson, so I try to throw some of his stuff in here to liven things up a little bit. This is pretty well status quo at the State Fire Marshal's office. My boss always likes to say he wants us to look like ducks. You know, they look so graceful swimming around the water, but if you ever look underneath the water, they're paddling like crazy. So it's not quite as graceful as it seems. So sometimes this is how some of this code stuff ends up being. We adopt a state fire code in Minnesota called the Minnesota Uniform Fire Code. You'll see the acronym MUFC, you'll learn a new acronym today. That became effective on June 29th of 1998. And then also that same year, a couple months later, we adopted the state building code that became effective on October 5th that year. Our state fire code adopts the Uniform Fire Code, one of the 4 that's out there. It's a 97 edition. It replaced the old 91 edition that we had. So on this presentation I'm going to show you, you'll see things in black. That means it's a change from the 91 to the 97 in the base book, the book itself. And where you see state amendments, in other words, where we went in and changed the code for the state of Minnesota, you'll see that in blue, and it'll have an asterisk. Get an idea on some of the things we did to the code. A lot of times people will say, well, I looked on page 38 of the code and it says this, and we say, yeah, but we have a state amendment that deletes that or that changes it or something. You still like that one, Another example. Gary, I'm still in mourning that he retired from actively doing comics, but we had some adoption philosophies that we went into. One of the things we've done in past code editions is we had NFPA's Life Safety Code, NFPA 101 adopted as part of the State Fire Code. We said this time, we're not going to adopt that. It's too confusing to actually have 2 different fire codes adopted. And it promoted what we used to call code shopping, or the code official would say, I don't like that. I don't go to this other book. I like that one better. And that's really not the way that the codes are set up to be. So we said, no, we're not going to have the Life Safety Code this time. That's just too confusing to do. But we said, you know, there's some parts in the Life Safety Code that are good, that we've worked with for 25 years in the state. So we're going to pick up some of those pieces. We're going to bring them in as state amendments into the fire code because we still need them. We think that they're good, and people are pretty accustomed to them in Minnesota. Discretion. If you've ever opened up the code book, you'll see that there's a lot of places in there where it says things like where required by the chief, or when required, or where approved, and things like that. And we said, well, you know, that's pretty discretionary. If you go back, some of you with a little gray hair in the room who've been actively involved in code enforcement for a long time, remember some of the old codes we had. Basically it says, thou shalt do whatever the code official tells you to do. Well, that really doesn't help you out a lot. very, very discretionary. We said, okay, discretion's good where it involves fire department responses, because that varies from town to town. You know, for St. Paul, you can get 6 engine companies and a couple ladders in 3 minutes. You go out to East Overshoe, Minnesota, and you know, typically it's same month response, but not necessarily. Usually try, but not necessarily. So we said, okay, for tactical deployment issues, that's fine, but not where it comes to basic level of fire and life safety. That shouldn't vary from city to city. If it's good fire and life safety, it's good in Robbinsdale, it's good in Roseville, it's good in Roseville. It's just, it shouldn't vary from one community to another. One of the philosophies that we have, and I know some of you love this, some of you probably don't like it, but we are strong advocates for automatic sprinkler protection. And we wanted to do everything possible to remove regulatory barriers and remove duplication of protection as far as sprinkler protection went. We figure that that is the Cadillac or BMW, whatever you want to say. It is the ultimate in fire protection that you can have right now. Now, maybe in a few years, somebody will build a better mousetrap and we can go with that. But right now, sprinkler protection, far and above, is the best single fire protection feature that we have. So we wanted to try to do things that removed barriers from encouraging people to sprinkler. What's in the way of them sprinkling these buildings? And there are a number of barriers, one of which is duplication of things. If you've got, well, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, well, maybe 2 of those can go away. I always talk about, you know, we have belt and suspenders, and some of our codes have gotten to the point where not only do we have belt and suspenders, we have rope and bungee cord too. We're just going to be absolutely sure that our pants don't fall down. But there comes a time when that is absolutely redundant. Now, redundancy is good if it's done often enough, but in a lot of times you want to try to remove that wherever possible. So we said we're going to take a look at some of this stuff and see what's getting in the way. And you're going to see some of these philosophies coming through in some of the state amendments that we put in. That just kind of lays out how the code is. Article 10 is what we're going to focus on primarily tonight, because that's the section that deals with fire protection systems. They broke it up now for testing and maintenance of fire protection systems into 2 different sections. One deals with new acceptance testing at the time of installation, and one deals with ongoing maintenance and inspection and testing of existing systems. Sprinkler systems, we're looking at an annual test. Fire alarm systems, it kicks you into basically NFPA 72, it's the Uniform Fire Code Standard 10.1. That varies a little bit in terms of testing frequencies. And standpipe systems every 5 years. I know of relatively few standpipes that get tested every 5 years. That's kind of a new one. Even sprinkler systems, aside from a few core cities who do enforce that, that's probably pretty rare to see them done on any kind of a regular annual basis. But one of the philosophies that we had is we're going to put a lot of emphasis on sprinkling, and therefore, if we're going to put the emphasis or the eggs into that basket, we want to make sure that that system's probably going to work. And what's one way you can do it is with the annual test. For those of you who don't have it, I would strongly encourage you to contact the National Fire Protection Association. They did a report which came out a year ago October, so October of '98, and it was on fire sprinklers, who has them and how well do they work. And in there, it's the most current study that also lays out why they fail. And the failures are, for those of you who introduced yourself in factory mutual, you know that very well because you probably researched it more than anybody in your company has. But typically it's valve shut off, lack of maintenance, improper density for the hazard being protected. That same stuff that typically annual maintenance or annual inspections can kind of bring to the forefront and get remedied. So that's the testing procedures or testing frequency. We also have a policy which is going to be on our website very, very soon. We're putting all our policies up there. One of them deals with inspection frequencies. There's a whole table in there, and it's everything from emergency lights to CO2 systems to lays out everything on there. So if you ever want to reference that. The way the fire code works is they adopt a uniform building code standard 9.1, which is basically a reprint of NFPA 13, but it's an old one, 91 edition. It's old. And they said, no. First of all, none of the contractors have the uniform building code standards probably on their shelves. Everyone's gone to 13. Matter of fact, we're even now behind the 8 ball because a lot of them are already doing it to the 99 edition of 13. But so we adopted, by reference, NFPA 13, the 1996 edition. Now, our division does allow you to design to newer standards, but you design the entire thing. You take the standard. You don't take a piece out of the standard that you like and a piece out of this one and a piece out of the 42 standard that you like and mix them together. You use one in its entirety. So we also added language that allowed the hose stream requirements to be modified in cases of a limited water supply if approved by the chief. This is one of those regulatory barriers. What we were seeing in a lot of cases, particularly in more rural areas, is we were having buildings that were going to sprinkler it, but they had one area in the building that was ordinary hazard, and the code officials saying, oh, that's ordinary hazard, you need 250 gallons per minute hose stream. They didn't have it. Now, mind you, some of these areas had no municipal water supply. The fire department was going to bring it on those big red trucks they have. But we had code officials saying, no, well, and we'd say, well, then we can't sprinkler it. We can't meet the hose stream allowances. We got enough water to sprinkler it, we just don't have enough for the hose stream. So we put that amendment and said, we want to see the building sprinkled. The hose stream is just kind of a safety margin. And in this case, nobody's going to rob that water supply, so leave it go. If you are looking at an NFPA 13R system, and obviously there's a lot of those installed, but when you do install those, you're not allowed all the other reductions that the building code allows, or all the other trade-offs, if you will. The building code assumes that that's not a fully sprinkled building, because typically we're not seeing the attic sprinkled. So then you don't get the increases in area for height and size and so on that the building code would allow you in a fully sprinkled building. So just so you're aware of that. Some of the major changes that had to do with sprinklers, they dropped the threshold height for buildings. It used to be high-rise buildings, had to be more than 75 feet. They dropped that to 55 feet. So we're now catching some mid-rise buildings at 5 and 6 stories that weren't there before. Understand now, this isn't a fire code, which does apply statewide. You get people say, oh, this isn't a building code area, I'm outside of the metro. This applies statewide. This is a state fire code. So even if you're up in East Overshoe, Minnesota, and they put up a 6-story building, if it's over 55 feet, which it probably is, they're probably going to have to sprinkle it, or they're going to have to sprinkle it by code. New educational occupancies, there are a couple exceptions, but basically new schools are supposed to be sprinkled. You can get away with some firewalls and busting up in the 20,000 square foot compartments. But most of the new multi-residential buildings, they could be anything from a dormitory to a senior assisted living to a fraternity house, those types where you have lots of people, they're not related. There's usually some cooking functions, sleeping functions, living functions going on, those types of facilities. If they have over 20 people staying in there, they're required to be sprinkled. This is a new trend that's coming out. If you're familiar with these senior assisted living, and now they're putting these group homes for physically disabled and mentally handicapped people into a lot of these into a smaller building. One place where they went backwards in sprinklers, but it's okay probably, is they said, okay, we're not going to require, the code used to say you had to sprinkler every stage. You had a stage, you had to sprinkler it. Well, you think about a lot of the elementary schools that you might have been to where your kids had programs, but there really wasn't much there. It's hard to argue that was really a stage as compared to like, the typical stage you see at a performing arts center, the Orgay or something like that. So it's just bigger ones over 1,000 square feet that really have something to burn on them, as opposed to just a raised platform kind of thing. So it did change that one. One of the state amendments we put in is we said if you have an R1, which that's our terminology for a multi-residential building, and that could be an apartment or a motel, hotel, area separation walls can't define separate buildings. What we saw a lot of architects doing, and a lot of code officials were accepting this, is they'd say, okay, I can have up to 20 hotel rooms before I need to sprinkler. So they'd put 19 rooms, put a 2-hour firewall, 19 rooms, another 2-hour, 19, and literally you could carpet the whole city with this building, and they said, wow, these are all separate buildings. Well, no, area separation walls, we don't have a real good history in them, multi-residential buildings. They seem to burn down quite a bit. We're taking some within a couple miles a year that have been rebuilt because those firewalls fail. So it's not. People are sleeping in there and they need the enhanced level of protection. Then you don't use a firewall to get out of sprinkler protection. And this is very similar. It's been in there for years for fire alarm systems of these. So did add some exceptions. If you have 3 stories or less and you have 4-hour area separation walls with no penetrations, we're pretty well now talking about like a 12-inch masonry, concrete masonry unit, a true maximum fire loss wall kind of thing. None of this 4 layers of sheetrock, because that gives you a 2-hour rating. That you couldn't do that anymore, and you're probably talking about separate utilities in each one of these, because there can be no openings or penetrations from one section to the other. We thought for some outstate areas that they need something sometimes where they have a very limited water or none. Another change this year, and this was to bring us into line with what the model codes are going to do in the year 2000, is they're dropping the sprinkler monitoring threshold to 20 heads. It used to be 100. One of the reasons for this, and actually the uniform fire code, the one we had in Minnesota, was the only one that wasn't at 20. The other 3 model codes already are there. And what they're saying here is with the use of extended coverage sprinkler heads and everything else, we're seeing fewer sprinkler heads installed in the same size footprint of the building. So shouldn't that warrant monitoring of those? So we dropped that down to 20. For existing systems, it's still at 100, but anything new going in should be at 20 heads. If you're a sprinkler contractor, you've probably seen that called out on some of your new plans coming in now. And I know a lot of times that's electrical, not fire protection, not sprinkler. Sprinkler alarms, well, I don't know what happened. I think everyone was drunk at the code hearings that day. And they passed one that said, if you got a sprinkler building, you got to have an audible device inside the building, so that if the sprinklers flow on people inside the building know. Okay? Well, I can kind of see that argument, but then again, I also argue, so what? They don't need to know. They're not in any danger. And they're in danger when there's smoke and flames coming out. They're not in danger because the water might be flowing 200 feet away from them. I just don't do that as a real safety threat any more than if the toilet overflows, you have to notify them. So it got in this edition of the code. It's already been deleted for the future ones, so it's just this one edition where it's going to be in. We amended it and said, if it's electronically monitored by a central station monitoring company, we're not going to require it. It's also very hard to get in certain buildings. If you think about it, a typical office building, who monitors it? Who's going to? Where do you have it ring at? Have it ring somewhere where they're gone half the time, in which case it doesn't matter anyway. So, another thing we added, this was based on a number of complaints we got from people who said you're putting too much emphasis on sprinklers and there's not enough fail-safes built into it. So we said, okay, all valves controlling water supplies have to be locked or secured in the open position. A lot of times people only enforce this when they were talking about the main control valve controlling 100 heads or something. You'd always see that one locked open. But a lot of times you have sectional valves that weren't. Might be controlling 20 heads down a wing or something, and they weren't. Or the one that I saw real common was the drop coming down to the kitchen hood extinguishing system. Might have a half a dozen heads in there, just a regular old globe valve on it. We said, no, secure them open. This doesn't have to be anything elaborate, just secured open. It can be one of those heavy cable ties or a lightweight piece of chain. This is not something that's really going to kill somebody. We put some exceptions in. Hey, if it's if it's high rack storage and it's 20 feet up and you got to get a ladder to get to it, okay, that's the same as being locked. If it's in a locked room inside a cage or something, that's equivalent to it. But anyway, we want to control the security of those valves. These were common sense things. The code is not common sense, although it tries to be, but we had to add some things. Believe it or not, we had to omit them. The top of elevator shafts. We've had that elevator hassle for a number of years. That's almost fixed, or some argue it has been fixed. Top of elevator shafts, non-combustible construction. That's really not what the fire problem is anyway. And besides, that shaft is about 90% obstructed with its car that goes up and down. So really that's not the problem. Where we have the problem with elevator shafts is in the pit. That's where you need the sprinkler protection. That's where all the garbage ends up over the years. That's where the janitor scoops all everything, that little crack in the elevator so it goes down the pit. Got everything down there, including the old oil and everything else. You can exempt them in machine rooms of traction type elevators. These are the ones, the cable and drum type. Typically this is in a penthouse on top of the building. Fire burns up, it usually doesn't burn down, so you got a fire on top of the building, oh well. These are typically non-combustible, and there's some good reasons why you don't want sprinkler water flow anywhere. The water getting on the braking system for those elevator cars that go up and down, much like the braking system on your car, only a little more sensitive than that. And then we also exempted swimming pools. We just have not had a history of swimming pools spontaneously catching on fire, so we said we'll put this amendment in. I still laugh when I go into some of these buildings and we stop here and call the swimming pool. There's sprinkler heads, of course, are all corroded and everything else. But, we literally had code officials that said, I'm not going to exempt that area because the code doesn't tell me I can exempt it. So we said, okay, now you can exempt it. Code allows you to. That gets into the common sense rule. Standpipes, for some of you who deal with those, they've changed some of the definitions. They've gone to automatic, semi-automatic, and manual. They've also gone to the wet and dry. We're used to the old class 1, 2, 3 standpipe thing, but there are some changes with that because it can be automatic, semi-automatic, or manual. We typically see more of the automatic where the water's there all the time, or the manual where basically that's the old dry where there's nothing in it. But there are some hybrids of these. You can have an automatic dry and a semi-automatic dry, and one of these they've complicated that. We put in an amendment to allow a reduction in standpipe pressure at the top if the building's sprinkled. Another one of the things that we were seeing, which was a barrier, is we have a requirement that you have like a 3-story building, you have to have a standpipe in it, particularly like an apartment building. Well, when you put the standpipe in, now you needed 100 pounds of pressure at the top. In very few cases in a 3-story building are you going to get 100 pounds of static pressure at the top. So what we automatically saw them doing is driving a fire pump in. Well, not only have you now driven cost in, you've driven in a very, very high maintenance device, the fire pump. And if you read NFPA's reports and factory neutral reports, the single most common component in a system to fail is the fire pump. Okay, so here you have a code requirement on top of a code requirement that's putting something in that you know may fail. Besides is those standpipes that we're seeing in those types of buildings are for fire department use only. If the fire department wants more pressure, they screw up the throttle on their big red truck. They can have lots of pressure. So we said, these mid-rise buildings, these low-rise buildings, there's no reason for that. Classic case is, I used to be fire marshal here in the community we're in Roseville. There's probably only 50 pounds of static pressure right here. Incredible flow. Even though the tower is right down the road here, there's not real good pressure. Every building here would have required basically a fire pump, even if you'd have waved it down to 65 pounds at the top. We didn't have 65 pounds sitting underneath the water tower at Rosedale. So, you kind of look at this and boy, you're driving it in. Now, from a contractor standpoint, if you had to put a fire pump in, what are you going to do with the sprinkler pipe? You're going to start downsizing, aren't you, to try to recover some of those costs? That's exactly what we saw. So now we had 6 sprinkler heads running off a 1-inch pipe because we're assuming it's operating at 175 psi. If that pump fails, we may not have adequate sprinkler protection now. So I said, okay, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this belt and suspenders kind of thing. So I said, let's do away with this. So got rid of class 2 occupant use standpipe in sprinkler buildings. Yay. We want people out. We want them calling 911. We don't want them fighting the fire. By having class 2 standpipe hose there, you're encouraging people to fight the fire, which is the wrong message to send. We did leave it in a couple of facilities, of factories and storage occupancies, where you possibly have a trained fire brigade who's knowledgeable with that. There's a whole bunch of stuff that kicks in now. If a private company is expecting their employees to do firefighting, they now have to meet all the OSHA requirements for fire brigades and all that, which is turn out your training, safety equipment, all kinds of stuff, and most places aren't going to do that anyway. Yeah, you'll have some that will, the Coke refineries and so on, those are very legitimate uses there. But the average mom and dad kind of business probably shouldn't be in that business anymore, fighting fire anyway. We changed the height requirement for standpipes from 3 to 4 stories if the building's sprinkled. Again, try to encourage sprinklers to go in. All right, if you build this 3 stories and you sprinkler it, you don't need to put a standpipe in. If you don't sprinkler it, you need to put a standpipe in. You need to put a pump, because we need to have 100 pounds at the top. Okay. For the cost of that pump and the piping for that, they can hang a lot of sprinkler pipe. So. Also increase the threshold in assembly occupancies used for exhibition to 12,000 square feet. It used to say 5,000. They used to trigger every school gymnasium to have standpipes exactly where you don't want them. Athletic directors get real nervous about water getting on their floors. That's really a biggie for them. We don't require them in Group A occupancies or assembly occupancies where it's sprinkled. Kind of our policy. Well, a change that happened in the commercial cooking equipment you may want to be aware of is it now requires that everything under the hood be shut off. It used to just say the fuel supply or the electric current to the appliances. Now it says everything, including the outlets that are under the hood. So they want all source of ignition shut off when that system activates underneath the hood. What we used to see is, okay, yeah, there were probably some posters plugged in and some other outlets, and they always stayed live. I do have to tell my classic over-engineering story. We had an electrical engineer. His name shall remain nameless or identity to protect the stupid, but we had a brand new senior assisted living facility where they had a kitchen in there. It was a fully sprinkled building, but they put one of the Ansel systems in, which I objected to in the first place, but okay, they did it. The old Ansel, like Ansel R102 wet chemical. But then the engineer figured, well, we need to shut off the power, so he had it shut off everything, including the lights. They killed everything in that room. So when the suppression system dumped, the room went dark. Just exactly what we want for a lot of old people. Thank you. So, but with this change, the intent was that cooking equipment, all the equipment under there goes off. The lights should stay on. Well, we only apply that to new ones because to go back into existing places and make them, hire an electrician to take that off the circuit and tie it all in, that would be a nightmare. Now, moving on to fire alarm systems, they used to be in the old Article 14, they moved to Article 10 now. We put in an amendment that said, your sprinkled building, you don't need heat detection. Always has made sense to me, but this is another one that code officials would say, well, I can't. You got to put heat detection in even if it's sprinkled. So why? There's a sprinkler head, there's a heat detector. Which one's going to go off first? What do you got? A handful of milliseconds difference between them, it isn't going to make any difference. So it's redundant, and so therefore we got rid of it. In assembly occupancies, it said the way that the codes read it says you need a manual fire alarm system. I said, I'm not so sure that's a good idea. Like the building we're in here would require a manual system. Is that really what we want in an assembly occupancy like this? When I came in here, there was a little line up front. Boy, one way to get a table quick is pull a fire alarm. Everybody else leaves and you get the table you want. That's really not what we want. So we amended Minnesota to say, no, let's put automatic in there. Let's put automatic and put detection into areas where we have the fires. The kitchens, the storage rooms, some of those. We typically don't have the fire starting in the large assembly areas like this. We have them in more remote areas. So. And we also put an exception for, I love this one because it's applied to churches until we amended it. So you'd have to have a manual pull station by every exit in a church. We don't have a real life loss history in churches, at least not 10 o'clock Sunday morning. They tend to catch on fire at 2 o'clock Saturday morning when no one's around, and it's usually the act of an arsonist. But we haven't got a body count. We couldn't even find nationally where there'd ever been anyone dying in a church fire during a normal church use time. So we said, now we get rid of this. So once again, the systems are not required if the building is fully sprinkled. This is where you see the detection laws. In schools, we got rid of the manual pull stations if it's a sprinkled building or has full detection. This is one of those belt and suspenders kind of things that has shown up for years. We actually jumped the gun on this. Now the other codes are picking this up using the Minnesota amendment on here. The International Fire Code and FP1 have both exempted manual pulls in a fully sprinkled building. Yeah, you still have to have a couple for staff activation, but you don't need one by every door. That was fine back in the 40s when that was the only fire protection we saw in a building. So now if you have an automatic sprinkler system or an automatic fire alarm system with smoke detection, you can exempt these manual pulls. They just don't serve the purpose anymore that you get with the automatic system. Yes.
Excuse me, do you still need a manual pull station at the schools that electrically secure those doors?
Yes, then you still would.
Then you still need the pull.
You still need that, yeah. I won't go through this. This is kind of stuff. Hardwired detectors have to be in any residence. Hardwired mean permanently connected to the electrical system. There's a section in here that talks about manual fire alarm boxes. It now requires a sign adjacent to it when it's only a local alarm and it's not monitored somewhere. And in a local alarm only, call the fire department. You'll note, of course, this is a simplex pull station.
Thank you.
Is there any flexibility on the wording of that? Because I'm just 7 years old, I read that thing, and I was
What does local mean? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very ambiguous term.
It means something to the alarm industry. It really doesn't even mean anything to the fire service. Good, talk to them. What does local mean? I don't know. There's probably some flexibility, but what you wanted to say is this. You have to call the fire department if there's a fire.
Dial 911.
Yeah, dial 911. Yeah. This has been one that's been in the works for a while, but they went to a standard audible evacuation signal called the temporal 3 pattern. You can see it kind of illustrated at the bottom. It's the 3 pulse temporal. It gives you a little break there so firefighters can communicate. And also we found over the years that people don't respond to a constant noise. They need that noise to be interrupted. Otherwise you just kind of tune it out, just like you tune out your significant other talking at home at night or anything like that. So that was kind of atria have to conform to the building code. We had some old atria that were actually built before we had a building code, and there's some unique features sometimes you see in the, typically you're talking about fully sprinkled in some kind of a smoke control or smoke exhaust system. You now have to extend the fire protection in spray booths to include the exhaust plenums, ducts, and both sides of dry filters. We've had a lot of fires that happen on the other side of the filters. And a lot of times, at least in the old ones, you used to see the fire protection stop at the face of the filter. No, you got to go on. Just like in a hood, kitchen hood, it's got to continue out. A lot of changes to high pile combustible storage. This is an animal, a moving target that's changing. And we're going to see more changes with this, but they revised the format, all new. They used to have a bunch of hazard classes. They no longer have class 5 commodities because NFPA 231 didn't tell you how to protect those. The fire code had this thing about class 5, but there was no protection scheme in there for it, so they said nah. So now they're just high hazard commodities. They now put storage of paper records in there, and they've now addressed that, which was going on before, which is one of the big questions we used to have. A whole bunch of changes to the table and the curtain boards, and there's been that old argument for a long time through this. We put in an exception that says, we affectionately call this the Cup Foods Amendment, because this is very common to Cup Foods. If you walk in, they want that new warehouse look, that, this big box kind of look, and you'd have the first aisle you walked into would technically be over 12 feet high. Well, that would make it high pile storage. The way the code read is the whole building now had to be treated as high pile storage, even though you had this relatively small area. So we said, nah, we're going to exempt that. And Cub isn't the only one that does it. You can go to Office Depot, Office Max. It's a very common retailing scheme right now. So even Sport Mart and some of those other ones, the aliens that you see. So we exempt relatively small areas up to 2,500 square feet from having separation requirements, venting, or draft curtains. There's a whole big debate going on right now about whether draft curtains and venting help you, particularly in sprinkled buildings. They now said that the fire protection for high pile storage must extend beyond it or to a permanent position, or partition rather. And It's based on the most restrictive design requirements. Think about like a Sam's Club that you go into, and here's the rubber tires, but down here they might just be selling cereal, but above it's the rubber tires. Well, you have to protect the rubber tires, even though most of it might be cardboard boxes full of cereal, which would be obviously much less of a commodity in terms of the hazard. But you have to do it to the worst thing, and you have to complete that fire protection to a permanent partition or a distance beyond that. This is what it talks about, 1 hour separation. We put in an amendment that allows the chief to require mechanical smoke removal systems in high pile storage. This is one we said this is a discretionary one because this is a tactical decision for the fire department. Are we going to put firefighters on the roof? That is a very, very labor-intensive operation to go out and start chopping holes in roofs. Kind of response with 30 firefighters in St. Paul. Something entirely different if you're talking about a third-ring suburb that maybe can muster 6 people during the day without going to mutual aid. They just plain and simple do not have the bodies to put on the roof to start to do that kind of an operation. So I said, okay, the chief can require mechanical smoke removal. I always personally prefer mechanical over automatic. I like to have some actual control on that as opposed to just the drop-out panels or the flip-open panels or whatever. And then also allowed mechanical smoke removal system to be designed in accordance with UBC standard 905, which is like 92B. If it's ESFR, what it does is tends to reduce your design by about 60%, Bob. Has that been pretty typical?
It's 1/3.
Yeah, it's about 1/3 of what you need, so you reduce about 2/3 over what you'd have to have otherwise in Article 81. And this was to recognize ESFR, the full suppression capabilities of ESFR as opposed to just controlling the fire, limiting its spread, that you have a more standard system. So we've seen a lot of abuse of that, though, however. Once again, I want to talk a little bit about some of the new technology and the future issues we see on the horizon. One being the smart smoke detector. This is not to be confused with the intelligent systems that have been out for a while. They now have some technology where the detectors will actually be able to smell and differentiate between a hostile fire and good fire. So it'll say, oh, no, that's burned toast. We don't do anything for burned toast. No, that is wood burning. We do something about that. So they've actually been able to take out and diagram out kind of a fingerprint of different smoke patterns. And now they're starting to design detectors that will just pick up certain ones in that spectrum and not all of them. That is probably good once they get it perfected because it'll be able to differentiate between these and will cut down on our false alarm. Right now, 98% of the fires, or 98% of the times the fire departments respond to an alarm if there is no fire. There is no products of combustion, there is no reason for that response. So that is a real problem with the alarm industry, and we're getting people that are getting real ambivalent about alarms and the old crying wolf, and they don't respond anymore. So this is a good thing based on some research that was done out of the University of Maryland with Dr. Jim Milkey. So it's able to recognize smells, and also it's a multi-agent sensor. So they're not just smelling smoke anymore. There'll be a combination smoke, CO, radon, blah, 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 blah. I mean, like 26 different things that they can pick up. Low oxygen levels, high nitrogen, whatever. They can pick up all these different agents. So we're going to be seeing that coming out right now. There's some prototypes being developed right now by some of the people at in the federal government who don't have a lot to do right now because the Cold War is kind of ended. Because they're putting some of their technology research that they've had into some other things right now, including this. We still have a problem with detectors with a lot of false alarm problems due to RF interference, and the power supply has always been a problem, and they're looking at new technologies to try to correct some of those that we've had. Sprinkler protection for flammable combustible liquids in plastic containers. We have not figured out how to protect those yet. The last time I bought oil for my car, you can't buy it in the old round cardboard steel tins anymore. Everything's in plastic. But they've had some really horrible fire tests that have shown that so far we have not come up with a way to protect these. And they're trying all kinds of things. ESFR had some promise for a while, but I'm not sure right now. But basically now we're storing all these flammable combustible liquids in plastic containers. And we don't have a fire protection scheme that really works for them yet. So that's going to be one of the, I see that as one of the big issues coming in the future. That's how all this stuff is being stored. And God forbid that you're doing it in 5-gallon pails, this stuff, because there's really no way of doing it then. Integrating human factors and systems together. Boy, this is a biggie. I see this one as one of the ways the engineering and the education community got to come together on some of this stuff. Because the engineering community is designing and building and creating stuff that the humans are incapable of using, or it just is so against everything that humans naturally do that they won't use the systems. So we need to find a way to get these things working together. One is, maybe we come to the day where we don't have fire alarms that are blaring at 75 decibels so everyone feels a need to leave. Maybe we have the elderly go back and stay in their apartment. It's a fully sprinklered building with detection in it. It's got automatic fire department response. And I always say, like in prisons, do we really have exit signs above the exits? It's kind of a nice tease, but do you want a fire alarm blaring at 100 decibels in a prison? They're not going to do anything anyway. They're not getting out until somebody comes up with a key and lets them out. So we need to get the engineering and some of the common sense human factor sides to jive on some of this. Another one that's kind of related to this is fire alarm panel common interface. I forget, and it's been now a little while since I've done it, but there's, for argument's sake, I'm going to say there's 100 fire alarm control panel manufacturers. I could be off by 10 or 20 one way or the other, but for argument's sake, let's say there's 100. And most of the manufacturers put out more than one model. So last count that I had, there were in excess of 500 fire alarm control panels out there. Now, normal to one is not normal to the other, because they each use their own nomenclature. So, some say ready, some say normal, some say system is on. There's no common terminology. Also, reset means different things on different panels. Silence means different things on different panels. Some say acknowledge, some say okay, some say silence, but they might do the same thing. So there's an effort underway right now to try to get all fire alarms to interface the same for firefighters and for people who have to use them. So when it says reset, it is going to reset, not acknowledge, not silence. So that's a project that's underway right now, I think with the Automatic Fire Alarm Association, I believe. And some of the NFPA 13R and 13D, you could extend this to 13D also. As a matter of fact, 13D is where it's more prevalent. Protection for large rooms. If you go back to a lot of the research studies that were put together when they developed 13D and 13R, they were for relatively small compartments. We're basically looking at bedroom scenarios, 10 by 12 feet or so in size. And now we're seeing in single-family homes, they have these huge great rooms, family rooms, that might have 6 sprinklers in them. And we've had a couple fires now where the fire overwhelmed the sprinkler protection. It took out too many heads because they were only designed to flow 2 or in 13R4 and completely overwhelmed the system. So that's going to be an issue, and I know NFPA, the 13 Technical Committee has taken this up in March at their meeting down in Arizona because they had some real concerns about that. The system failed, basically, because if you went into the pass-fail criteria in 13D and 13R, you never had flashover, you never had temperatures in excess of 500 degrees, you never had carbon monoxide levels that were real high, and in fact, that's exactly what they've seen in these situations. So there's going to be a relook at that. It's coming up real soon here. Before I shut this part down, any questions? I know I went through that awful fast. I want to just give you a real brief, I haven't even run this yet, so this is going to be literally, we're going to be teaching on the run here. This is our new CD that we developed as part of our code class that we recently gave. You're going to get a copy of it tomorrow. This is supposed to auto-run here. It said it's supposed to, but it's not. Something's going on here. Got Adobe Acrobat for the reader. It's installed on there. Should come up to a screen, yep, kind of the menu screen, which you'll be able to click on a series of buttons over on the side to find out what you want. There's also a menu that comes up on the side, so what do you want in here? And like I say, I'm literally learning on the fly. If you want our Sprinkler stuff, you can just click on the little Sprinkler logo here and bring that up, or some of our fire or specialized ones. We'll have all our policies on here, and you can just go over to them and click on them, which will bring those up so you can read them. They're also on here in Word format, but most people like it in the Adobe. They can print it out, but if you want it in Word, that's also there. Within the individual policies, you might see a reference to a statute or a rule. You can click on that. At least in theory, it's supposed to take you to that. Yep, there you go. It now takes you to that rule, so you can read that rule part in there. For any of you, like I said, that went through our code update class recently, you'll be getting a copy of this. I just want to see one or the other. And then we have a bunch of the presentations that we've done, including here our PowerPoint presentations. You want to show them yourself, use them, they're there. Available for that. This is one we have, like classifying residential buildings, some of our sprinkler stuff. Put together a real nice, if you've ever had problems, I'm sure some of you have in the sprinkler industry, about what is this commodity, what is it? Is this a class 1 or a class 4, or, you know, because you really don't have it. We've got like 4 pages on this one that talks about high piled storage and classifies a lot of things that you might otherwise not know. We've got list after list of there's examples of different commodities and where they fit in. And here's the For those of you who didn't attend our class, we're going to have a number of extra of these made up so that if you want to purchase them, okay, here's an example of different commodities, and there's 5 or 6 pages of these. So to tell you what it is, here level 1 carton aerosol is a class 3. So you'll know by doing this where to classify it. Packaged candy is a class 3, and so on. Some of the others are group A plastic. So we'll have these resources available for you. Let's see if I can get another. There's also a search function on here, so you can type in a word. I'll really screw it up. And it'll 99 out of the 228 documents on here got the word in them. Then you go down and say, oh yeah, I wanted this policy here dealing with domestic water sprinklers, and it'll take you to, double click on it. It'll take you to that policy. And highlight the word for you. So we finally had to cut Richard Pearson off. He was going crazy with this, and every time you try to make a new improvement, we finally said, no, you can't improve on perfection. Let's just stop and get it out to people. So this will be available, like I say, for a cost. Probably less than $10 or so. It depends what we have into it. For those of you who didn't take the code class, for those people who did take it, it's free. It will be sent to you real soon. So went through it in a hurry. Any questions, comments, complaints?
Just contact your office to get for
Yeah. Yep. We are really trying to get into the electronic age. I was real glad to hear about the comments that were made earlier about sending out the notices and so on email. Please go on our website. There's a tremendous amount of information. There's going to be more. Most of the stuff will also be on our website.
What's your address?
www.dps.state.mn.us, and there'll be a button there for fire marshal, pipeline safety. There's another long name, F marshal something, which is or a search engine, go fire marshal, will take you there. We all have email, and if you go on our website, there's an address list for all the employees, so if you want to send me something, or Katie, or John, or anybody, you just click on it, you can send us an email message. We have a section there if you want a code interpretation. It's fire code or something, at state in US or something.
That's on there too.
That's on there too, yep, somewhere. I don't know how to work this thing yet, so.
That's one of the first things I found.
Yeah. But if you want to send in a code question, you want an interpretation on how this is, you can send it right into there. I will tell you, and this may sound cruel, but I answer my email before I answer phone messages now. That's just how technology is changing, because every time I get an email, my computer tells me I have one. If I'm talking on the phone, I don't know that I'm getting another call. It's just going into voicemail. And I may only check that a couple times a day. But email, we're checking that like now all the time, constantly. So if you want the quickest response, plus you'll get it in writing, that might be a good avenue for you. All of our policies and interpretations will be on our website. They'll be available for anybody. This isn't something we're going to keep secret. The CD is a little nicer because you have all the hyperlinks that will take you from one section to another and so on. So that's a little cleaner. We're pretty proud of that. All this stuff is going to be there and available for people. So whatever we can do to make it easier. Yes?
John, do you want to announce about yesterday's signing of cooperative agreement?
For some of you who have been kind of on the periphery of the last few years, there was a great deal of legislation coming out of the Legislative Auditor's Report a couple of years ago about the interface between the building code and the fire code, and the building code division and the state fire marshal division. As of yesterday, we inked a cooperative agreement between the two divisions, offering to issue joint interpretations, to adopt codes simultaneously so you wouldn't have codes becoming effective on different dates, to set up a resolutions panel to deal with where there's a difference of interpretation. We've had a few of those where we say it should be sprinklered and they say it shouldn't. We go to a resolutions panel that would then be made up of people from both sides and say, okay, let's hammer this out. That's a resource for not only code officials but also the design community, architects and engineers when you get into some of these hassles. And also it's a way for like the design community and contractors, if they're having a problem in a particular municipality with an issue, and say, hey, I want to bump this up to the state. I want to get an interpretation from the state, and those interpretations will then become binding and will probably be put into code language at some time in the future. Much like NFPA does with their formal interpretations, then it becomes the TIAs that become actually part of the code next time. So we're pretty proud of that. It's been a long time coming. So, Phil.
Speaking of that, you just kind of touched on it a little bit as far as getting different interpretations from the
local authority to the state. Can you talk about a little bit about the pending legislation regarding competency of AHJs a little bit?
Yes, the State Fire Marshal's Division put in a proposal in their sprinkler rules that are open now, open for comment anyway, to require that AHJs doing plan review and inspection of sprinkler systems meet some certain levels of competency. They had some baseline training and also some continuing education. That was developed primarily as a recommendation that came out of the Fire Marshals Association task group that put it together. We're meeting some opposition from some fire officials, but and most of the ones that deal with sprinklers on a regular basis are supporting it. But you have some that are on smaller departments that say it's an unfunded mandate and it's, you're requiring us to do something. So no, we're not requiring. Get out of the plan review business if you don't want to get trained on it. To us, it's not fair to impose certain requirements on the industry that they need certain education, continuing education, and yet the people policing the industry don't need some continuing ed. That to me is, that has some flaws in that philosophy. But we'll see what that comes out. I'm sure that those rules are going to a hearing. Did they get the 25 signatures? Mm-hmm. March 1st, I think, is the hearing date. But there's other issues there too. There's a whole apprentice issue and a whole bunch of other things going on there. So there'll be a hearing March 1st, and I forget where it's at. But
We don't know yet.
we don't know yet.
We did know. We don't know.
Location be determined.
How's that hearing held? So we know.
Everybody who sent in a comment and everybody who's on the mailing list will be notified of it. It's also on our website. Everything's on the website.
Hey, John?
Yes.
If they can't remember your website address, ours is a lot easier. We got a hot link to your.
Oh, dear, okay, see that?
FFCDI.com.
That'll work.
SFPE and FSA, they're all there.
Yeah.
Much easier
I
than all
think
that other stuff.
Kirby does, don't we have links back and forth between ours? So, I mean, if you start searching around and surfing, you'll find the
Search
links.
engine fire in Minnesota.
Yeah,
Somehow
you're going to get it. NFSA has links back and forth. So there's a number of ways you're going to get there. Anything else? Yes.
You said the sprinkler valves have to be locked open. Is that even if they have tamper protection on them?
Yes. See, what we were finding, and one of the problems that we had, is the alarm monitoring companies, especially the central stations, treat a tamper alarm as a supervisory signal, and they don't do anything with it. They try to make their 3 or 4 calls. If they don't get a hold of anybody, oh well. And we've had them literally shut off for years. So far back that the alarm companies couldn't find a record of where the signal came in, and nobody was ever notified, so they had no fire protection. And these are on, wall post indicator valves that anybody could shut down. So we said, nah, you chain them all. I mean, the fire department's got the universal key we carry around, so we can always, we can shut them down in a hurry if we need to. But we want them open. We want water that's sprinkler system.
Is there an exemption then for industrial sites that may have several hundred of those that are all tampered?
If they're in a secured or fenced area, yeah, or somehow where they're not accessible to people, yes. But like I say, what we're talking about is, heavy-duty cable tie or lightweight chain. This is not, you don't have to go to get, 3/4 inch log chain or something and chain them shut. It's just to keep the honest people from messing with them. Okay. Thank you very much. If you got any questions, feel free. Give us a holler or give us an email. And look forward. This is kind of an annual trip for me that I get to make to this group. So look forward to seeing you next January, February, March, somewhere in there. So thanks again.